Hello, and thanks for coming to our virtual poster presentation today for ECOTS 2020. I'm Brianna Kurtz.
And I'm Sarah Smith.
And today we're going to talk to you about a cross-collaboration experiment that we did with our students called A Whale of a Tale, Explorations of Bias in Surveys on Marine Life. So the purpose of this project was to have a cross-disciplinary activity that took students from AP Statistics as well as our senior level marine science course at a high school and try to get a deeper understanding of survey bias in terms of wording and sponsorship. The overall goal was to look at public opinion on perceived dangers of whales and sharks and to look at how media, industry, and general wording could affect people's perceptions.
So the project, students focused on, in marine science, the whales in popular culture, our history of whaling, the current views on both whales and sharks, and how the media displays both of these organisms. So students saw this slide and they went through a timeline on the history of whaling, etc., and they had to work through what they thought would be the most impactful parts of the history of whaling. And each student worked through this. We also looked at how things simply as Google search, and this is the top results for what you see about sharks and whales. And then the AP Statistics students.
For the AP Statistics students, what they did on their end was they're in the middle of their sampling and experimentation unit. And the students were teamed into groups of 4, and every one of those groups was given a different sponsoring organization to sponsor a survey about perceptions of sharks and whales. But every one of these different organizations had some kind of inherent bias, either bias towards sharks, bias towards whales, or perhaps looking at an overall way to preserve both of them. So groups were given places such as a Sea Shepherd organization, some Japanese whaling groups, and some preservation groups as well. The students were then instructed to design a survey based on their bias after researching the organization and distribute it to 40 fellow students. Some of them did it with a Google Forms survey and some did it by hand. Here's a couple examples of student work. So putting in an inherent bias. Recent studies show that 51% of shark and human interactions are unprovoked, while 67% of interactions with whales result in death. Knowing this, how do you feel? What's scary? Some instead use a lot of pictures to try to make things look a little bit less intimidating and use Likert scales in order to determine different levels of danger. Here's some of the results from some of the surveys. Or going deeper into coral reefs and looking at habitat and talking about how those might be important to sharks and whales, and looking at an overview of these organisms that maybe had a bias towards preserving all different marine life.
So once that they had the results from the statistics course, I asked the students, so what do you think CRUM students think about this topic? So we took the results and the students had to look at the surveys. They were looking at the surveys themselves. What did they think? And then also taking that information and everything that we had learned in our unit on marine mammals and marine fish and how these guys are portrayed in media. So they took all this information and kind of brought it together. Example of student work here. So we can see that the students were able to determine that sharks are viewed in a way that's not necessarily true, where whales are mammals and they're viewed in much more relatable, etc. And in books, media, all these different outlooks are portraying sharks and whales in an unfavorable way.
So what we kind of saw from this, from reflection of student learning, the statistics students especially report an increased understanding of survey bias and also paying a lot of attention more to who was sponsoring a survey and what those organizations were.
The marine science students saw how perceptions in a concrete way from their peers, and they had an opportunity to investigate raw data.
And overall, we found this to be a very positive cross-collaboration, and even with students who were only enrolled in one class or the other. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me, Brianna Kurtz.
And Sarah Smith.
Thank you so much and enjoy ECOTS 2020.